Yeah, so I'm Tom. I'm a qualified doctor. Been a GP for over a decade now. I've decided as of the last sort of year or two to sort of take a slightly different walk in professional life, and now doing sort of more mental health based work. I found a lot of my GP work was to do with mental health and stress. Around about 50% of consultations, if you look at the stats, are to do with mental health and stress in GP. And I felt as though I didn't really have the time and the resources to help individuals the way I wanted to. And so I thought if I did a bit of sort of retraining and re-education, that maybe I could set up a platform to help individuals and give them a bit more time and a bit more information, and a bit more knowledge and empowerment to help themselves.
So today we're diving into a topic that affects many of us, and that's chronic stress. But why is it important to talk about it?
Chronic stress is something that, first of all, a lot of us don't necessarily realize that we have. We get so used to actually being stressed, we don't realize that that's what's going on in our bodies. And the reason why that's so important is because it has a profound, what we would call systemic effects on our bodies and our minds. So that means it affects all parts of our body. It affects our mind. It can affect our emotional health, our mental health, and of course our physical health, often in a very negative way. And it is associated with many different diseases and many different risk factors. So it really can. I know it's a cliche to say that stress kills, but in this case, actually, chronic stress really can.
Can you tell us a brief explanation on what chronic stress is?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we start with the idea of what stress is, so stress can be broken down into two sort of meanings, I suppose. So from a scientific point of view, or from a body point of view, we talk about the stress response in the body. That's to do with hormones and different things that happen inside our body. And then we've also got the term stress that we use sort of, in general in society. And often that's usually people say they're stressed when they're sort of feeling slightly uptight, they're feeling short of time or workload, and they can actually feel it very much in their bodies, and it may affect their behaviors and their ability to deal with things. So that's kind of what we mean by stress. Now, um, whether something is what we call chronic stress, which is what we're talking about today, or acute stress, basically depends on the duration of the stress. So, for example, acute stress would be, let's say, someone cut you up or something on the road, and you feel sort of a bit angry and a bit surprised and a bit shocked, and you feel that initial bit of surge of stress. Or let's say you get an email that requires you to do a bit more work, and you think, "Oh, my life, where have I got the time to do this from?" And you get that initial reaction of stress that quickly settles, and you go back to sort of feeling slightly more calm and in control. With chronic stress, what this means is that we're having stress more often than not. So most days of most weeks of most months. Um, and it can sometimes be sort of obvious. So you might know that something that is stressing you. So for example, if you've got a stressful job and you actually feel the stress, you can feel in your body every time you're going into work, for example, or let's say having, parents, raising children can be a stressful thing, and you can feel it in your body, and that's going over a long period of time, months into years. But after, again, more commonly, actually what happens with chronic stress is that it's not that noticeable.
Mm.
It's something that just sort of rumbles along in the background. You kind of, in a way, almost kind of get used to feeling that way, so it kind of feels normal. But the problem with this is that it's long lasting. So we're talking, it's not a one-off stressful event that settles really quickly. It's something that just lasts and goes on and on and on and on and on for weeks and months at a time.
I'm wondering what are some common causes?
So common causes of most sort of chronic stress, probably unsurprisingly, is people's work. So that's the most common source. Obviously, spend a lot of our time working. If we're therefore in a stressful situation or a stressful job, that makes sense. That certainly that is the most common cause, I would say. The second one would be relations or relationships. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean spousal or partners. It can be, obviously, but in terms of ongoing issues with parents, with siblings, or with children, so parenting. Um, those are two of the most obvious causes of chronic stress. Another cause of chronic stress, which we'll probably come on to today, that I don't, again, people probably don't necessarily obviously see, is actually not getting your needs met
Mm.
in life. So we all have certain needs that we need to have met to sort of function optimally as human beings. And actually, a lot of if those needs are not met for whatever reason, that can be actually a sort of a very subtle cause of chronic stress. And then, of course, occasionally, of course, life events. So if we have the death of a loved one, if something we're the victim of some crime or something like that, then of course those significant sort of traumatic events
Mhm.
can then set off a chronic stress response.
What happens in the body during the chronic stress response?
Yeah, so if we just talk about what happens in the sort of acute stress response first, because then we can compare it to the chronic stress response. So in the acute stress response, what happens is um, something happens in our environment, and we sense it and we process the information. It goes into our bodies,
Yeah.
and then what happens is there's two different ways that the stress sets motions in our body. First is through the what we call the hypothalamic axis. Basically, all that means is information comes into our brain. It goes through a part of our brain called the thalamus to our hypothalamus and then to our pituitary gland. So it's called the thalamic pituitary axis. And what that does is that sets off releases some hormones into our body that
Mhm.
goes all the way down to our adrenal glands that sit above our kidneys. And that causes a release of cortisol. So that's the first stress hormone. The second stress hormone, which people will be very common knowledge probably about, is adrenaline. And that gets released again through what we call an unconscious nervous system, something called your sympathetic nervous system. And that is some nerves that run down all the way from your brain, all the way down your spinal cord. And again, directly innervate the adrenal glands, a different part of them, and it releases adrenaline. Now, what was to understand what happens in the body, we have to understand, well, what's the point of this stress response initially? Where does it come from?
Mhm.
And again, people have probably heard of the fight and flight system. So again, when we were cavemen and cave women, world was a very dangerous place, and we might, we see all sorts of predators coming for us, tigers or lions or whatever, or people of other clans, and there was a genuine sort of threat to our safety and life. So what happens is you set off this stress response, and the idea of it is that it enables you to face that response to that threat. Sorry, so either you fight it, so you get ready to have a fight, or you run away, so you flight. So what happens is these hormones are released in order to prepare us for that event. So what happens is, first of all, our pupils dilate. So that means we can focus on our target. Second of all, our heart rate increases. So we've got energy to sort of fight or run. Our breathing rate increases so we can get extra oxygen into our system. And probably more importantly, actually, and the way we feel stress is that our blood gets redirected. So if you're going to fight someone or run away, you don't need blood in your stomach or your intestines. It's no good digesting food. That's a waste of blood and a waste of energy. So actually, we redirect blood to our large muscle groups. So biceps, quads, legs, all that sort of stuff. And that's often when people feel stressed or they get a shock, they often describe that feeling of a drop in the stomach or sometimes feeling sick. And what that is just literally the blood being redirected from your stomach to other areas of your body. We also get things like you need extra energy, so you get a release of sugar from your liver into your bloodstream, and you initially get a bit of an increased blood flow to your brain to help you sort of make decisions in that situation. So that is what the system's based for, and millions of years ago, very helpful, kept us alive, wonderful. The problem is that in modern society, the system isn't actually really that useful. It's well intended and means well, but thankfully, touch wood, most of us in our daily lives are not in a life threatening or a safety threatening position. And so, actually, this unnuanced stress system doesn't really help. And especially if we become chronically stressed, what that means is that acute stress systems just, again, it's usually a bit more subtle, but what it means is it's just ticking over gradually. So instead of going up and down like that, so going up to stress and coming down to normal, it just goes up and just ticks along gradually. And what that means is we have slightly high levels of cortisol, slightly high levels of adrenaline in our blood circulating around our body. Now, what does that do? So as you can imagine, it often means you have a slightly higher heart rate, Our blood pressure would increase a little bit more. We may have issues with our breathing because we're breathing at a different rate. It's putting more strain on the body, more stress on the body, particularly muscle groups and joints. If the blood is going away from the digestive tract, we can have digestive problems as well. And so, and when we're going to talk obviously about the health effects, as we go by, but generally that is what's happening in the chronic stress response. It's the acute stress response, which was helpful millions of years ago, but it's taking place in our body just on a more subtle level, sometimes unnoticeable, but it's just going on and on and on and on and on and on, and never really going completely resetting back to normal.
So what health problems can happen if you stress for a long time?
Yeah, so if we're talking about chronic stress, or another way of thinking about it, sometimes people have what we call repeated bouts of acute stress. So that's when you sort of stressed, calm down, stressed, calm down, stressed, calm down, and that's going on and on throughout your life, which can be another way of the way a chronic stress manifests. So the health problems are wide-ranging. Now, certainly we can there are physical health problems and there are mental health problems. So if you focus on the physical ones first, initially, if you think on a basic level, if your heart is beating faster all the time, it's a pump, and it's being used more and more and quickly. And like anything in life, it can get tired. And so actually, if this is happening over a long period of time, it can lead to problems with the heart muscle getting tired. So things like heart failure. And also the potential of developing arrhythmias. That's when the heart stops going lub-dub, 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 and goes all over the shop. So atrial fibrillation, for example, is an example of that, sorry. Also increased blood pressure. Now, increased blood pressure increases the risk of things like strokes, heart attacks, problems with your kidneys as well. We've then also got the risk of things like diabetes. So if you remember, I said that when we're in a stress response, we get a release of sugar from our liver, just to give us more energy. Now, that's fine. But if that happens over a longer period of time, what you've then got is that your body has to release more insulin to get that sugar back into your cells. Now, again, if that's happening over a long period of time, eventually, either your cells stop getting responsive to insulin, there's so much of it around, they just kind of end up sort of ignoring it, really. Or the pancreas, which reduces insulin, again, just gets tired. It only has so much energy. It can only produce so much insulin, and it kind of wears out. And so then that can lead to diabetes, which is just having higher sugar in your blood. And that could be type 2 diabetes, which people might be familiar with, or even insulin-dependent diabetes. And actually, there has been some studies show that there's been an increase in late onset type 1 diabetes in adults of late, and that's where you require insulin to get the blood back in cells. You have to have injections of insulin, and there's a link that maybe that might be to do with actually chronic stress that we're undergoing in the modern society. Also, the stress response is what we call a pro-inflammatory state. So what we mean by that is that it increases inflammation in the body. You have a high level of certain chemicals called interleukin-6, interleukin-8, and tumor necrosis factor alpha. The names don't matter, but they're pro-inflammatory molecules. So what does that mean? Well, that means there's more inflammation circulating around in our body. And inflammation in our body is not a good thing. And it can cause wide-ranging consequences. It increases the risk of inflammation of your liver. So an inflammation liver can lead to things like liver cancer, or just pain in the liver area. Increased inflammation can lead to things like autoimmune diseases, so sort of multiple sclerosis, or any chronic pain syndrome. It can lead to digestive tract problems such as Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, which are inflammation conditions of the bowel, and also another one that's often related to strep, peptic ulcers. So when people get stomach ulcers, that can be related to chronic stress. And again, inflammation actually increases your chance of things like strokes and heart attacks, vascular disease in your hands and your feet, and also kidney failure, because the blood vessels in the kidneys get inflamed. And then also, kind of the other interesting one as well about chronic stresses and this pro-inflammatory response physically is it actually increases your risk of cancer over a long period of time. So you have these things at the end of your chromosomes, which are which hold the DNA in your cells, called telomeres, and they are basically like little blocks that protect the end of the chromosomes from getting mutated or anything nasty happening to them. And what happens is, as you get more inflammation, these telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter until they go away, which means your chromosomes are left more vulnerable and susceptible to other toxins that can cause mutations. And mutations then lead to cells growing rapidly out of control, which is what cancer is. So it has wide-reaching implications. And also just another common one, actually, which people will probably relate to, is irritable bowel syndrome. So again, if you're not having much blood in your stomach or digestive tract, it affects your ability to digest stuff. And your bowel doesn't contract nicely and smoothly. It goes a bit all over the shop, and you can end up with sometimes constipation, sometimes diarrhea, sometimes lots of abdominal bloating and pains. That's a very another common relatable example of chronic stress. And that's what happens physically in the body.
How does chronic stress
Yeah.
affect mental health, including conditions like anxiety and depression?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we focus on the brain now, so stats will show that if people are feeling stressed, um, uh, depression and anxiety are often not far behind. And indeed, actually, if you look at all cases of anxiety, there will not be one case of what we call generalized anxiety disorder that is not caused by chronic stress. The two are linked like that. Okay. And even up to about 90% of cases of depression are due to chronic stress, so very closely linked. And of course, things like anger issues people will really able to relate to as well. And also things like PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. But if we take anxiety and depression, two of the more common mental health issues. So with anxiety first, there's a part of your brain basically has sort of three parts, if you like. It has this supercomputer on top called our grey matter or neocortex, which is the most recently developed part of the brain. You have this sort of middle bit of your brain, which is called the mammalian brain, which deals with emotions. And you have your lizard brain at the very bottom, which basically controls heart rate and breathing and all that sort of stuff, keeps us alive. Now, between those two last parts of the brain, there's something called your amygdala, which is this tiny little structure. And the idea of the amygdala, or the job of the amygdala, is to sense danger. So again, if we go back to cavemen or cavewoman times, if they saw something that was unusual, let's say a predator or whatever, immediately that information would cause the amygdala to spark into action, almost like a light bulb, and it would prick its ears up. Okay, if it was a cat or something like that. And that's our danger sensor. So it's telling us, hello, something's wrong in the environment. We need to be careful. The stress response starts and we're alert and aware. Now, again, very useful in that sort of situation. But the problem is nowadays, the system hasn't developed any further. It's still the same system that was millions of years ago. It hasn't changed. So the problem is this system is still getting activated on a daily basis when there isn't really any threat to life. And what happens is if you get stressed by something, your cortisol level goes up, the amygdala sort of starts, blinking, but it often doesn't go back to normal straight away. So the cortisol levels in your body stay up for a little while, the amygdala stays a little bit alert for a while. And so what happens then is you then start to associate other things with the initial stressful thing that happened. It's what we call the ripple effect. So if you ever dropped a stone in a pond, and then you see it hit the pond and the ripple effect spreads out, spreads out, spreads out. And that's what happens with anxiety. So something happens, causes a stress response, makes you feel anxious, worried, or stressed. But then what happens is you then start to get stressed about other things that were slightly related to the initial problem, but then get further and further removed from the initial problem until you're actually stressed about something or anxious about something that has nothing to do with the original problem. It's that ripple effect.
I think it's very, very common.
Absolutely, very common. And so sometimes we can find ourselves feeling anxious. Hang on a second, there's no reason for you to feel anxious. There's no actual threat. There's nothing for you to worry about. But I am just anxious and I am just worried. And you end up with what we call a generalized anxiety disorder, which is what it means. You become generally anxious about a wide-ranging things, and you're not really entirely sure why. You just feel it. And it's basically your brain almost playing a bit of a trick on you. It's trying to help you, but it's well intentioned, but it's not helping. Actually, it's making things far worse. And so that's when we get generally anxious. So, and people will be able to associate with this. You wake up in the morning, and you just feel on edge. You've got that sense throughout the day that you're just, something's going to happen, something bad's going to happen. You're worrying about this, you're catastrophizing and worrying about things that aren't even going to happen, that might happen, months in the future. And that's what happens. And that's because if you, and so that's if you, because that's because if you're having stress on a daily basis, that amygdala is never shrinking and going back down to normal size, or being inactive. It is constantly active and it is growing. People who have chronic stress and chronic anxiety have what we call amygdala hypertrophy. That means your amygdala actually grows in size. It's like a muscle. You're using it more and more, it actually grows in size. And if it grows in size, it has more power. And if it has more power, it's wider reaching. And it's almost like what people will call a vicious circle. It's a positive feedback loop. And so instead of getting sort of just staying level of anxiety, often you just get more and more and more anxious. And it's a vicious circle that obviously, unfortunately, a lot of people do struggle with, especially in today's society.
Yeah.
And if we talk about sort of put that side one side and look about depression, so obviously just from a basic point of view, if you're feeling chronically stressed or on edge all the time and you're feeling anxious all the time, then you're probably going to get down about it. It's going to get you down. It's going to make you feel hopeless and that there's no end to it. So that in itself can lead to depression. But also interestingly, on a purely sort of anatomical thing, there's a fascinating thing about stress and depression. So there was a guy called Brodmann who divided the areas of the brain as different functions. There's 52 areas. Anyway, there's an area called 25 that sort of sits in this sort of middle bit of your brain, the emotional part of the brain. And what happens is that's when we have stress and we have inflammation, what happens is this part of the brain is inflamed. It gets activated by the inflammation. Now, this part of the brain is actually is usually associated with what we call the sickness response. So let's say you get the flu or a viral bug or whatever, your temperature goes up, you feel lousy. You first of all want to stay in bed. You don't want to get up because you're too tired. You don't feel great. You often want to withdraw and isolate from people. You don't want people to come in. Don't want to see people that might get the bug, so you kind of stay away. And you just feel rubbish. Now, what happens in chronic inflammation is that the same part of the brain is activated, but we're not sick. We don't have a viral bug. We don't have a fever. We feel physically not too bad. But what it does is when this bit of the brain gets activated, what does it do? It makes us want to stay in bed, and it makes us want to withdraw and isolate. And we have a sense that we need to be doing this because there's something wrong. And that is kind of depression. So it's funny. So your brain is being activated to tell you that you're sort of sick, but you're not. And so we interpret it as depression. So that's why there's such a link between chronic stress and depression. So it can actually chronic stress can make you depressed and make you feel as though you're depressed. And so obviously, again, people who suffer depression will know sometimes one of the hardest things to do when you're depressed is to get out of bed. Just to get up in the morning can be a massive struggle, a massive fight. And that's one of the reasons why. And actually, although it's one of the hardest things to do, sometimes the best thing you can do when you're feeling depressed is actually get up out of bed and actually get up outside. It's the last thing you feel like doing because your brain's telling you not to do it. But actually, one of the best ways to overcome it is to do those sorts of things. And then the brain will gradually catch on and realize that it's not sick, that we're not unwell, and that actually we're okay. But to say, chronic stress, anxiety, depression, all linked together.
Let's just do it, even though it's very difficult.
Absolutely, it can seem like and I know, and from personal experience, and I've seen obviously lots of patients with it as well. I know it can be the most difficult thing. It can almost seem overwhelming, but I promise you, if you do it, you will feel better. And actually, this is why sometimes, again, people with depression often describe it being worst first thing in the morning. Actually, if they then are, one of the reasons why it gets better throughout the day is because they get up. They're actually able to get up. And obviously they're distracting themselves and that sort of stuff, but also the brain is registering, oh, actually, on a subconscious level, oh, actually, maybe I'm not that sick. Actually, maybe we're not sick. Maybe we're okay. And so actually, sometimes people's depression symptoms can ease a bit throughout the day.
What are some usual ways people try to handle long-lasting stress?
Yeah, so we have these. So there's sort of, I suppose, if you want to put into black and white thinking, good ways and bad ways.
Mhm.
So good ways people often can try and do it is take their stress out on something else in a productive way. So exercise is a good one. Some people can sort of, it makes them actually run a bit faster if they're jogging or if they're doing a bit of exercise or punching a bag or whatever. So those are some better ways in which to deal with it, because you're getting the stress out of your body and also you're getting the other effects, the cardiovascular, the fitness effects of doing exercise. Some people with chronic stress actually deal with it and put it in different artistic forms. So whether it be music, whether it be, just singing out the top of your voice to that music, whether it be doing artwork, can be another good way. People express things that way. However, what a lot of us do as humans, and it's understandable, is we seek what we call maladaptive ways of coping. So mal means basically it's the Latin word for wrong or evil. And it's basically, so we adapt, we take on certain behaviors to help us with the stress, but they're not really very helpful. And actually they kind of make things worse. So for example, classic one would be drinking alcohol. And in a survey, I think last year, 29% of people said they'd either started drinking or increased their alcohol consumption to cope with stress. And there's a reason for this. Alcohol, and we'll come and talk about it maybe a bit when we talk about techniques, but the parasympathetic nervous system will come on to help, is a system based in our body that helps calm us down. And alcohol acts on that system. So that's why we feel relaxed when we drink. The same with smoking. So people will say that, again, I think the survey is about 20% of people have either taken up smoking or increased the amount of smoking to help them deal with stress. Another one, of course, is comfort eating. And often, if we're comfort eating, we're craving things. We want to offset the stress with what we call the reward system. So a nice hormone called dopamine, which you've probably heard of, which makes us, is what we call the pleasure-seeking hormone. It motivates us to seek things that are rewarding. And one of the most motivating things to seek is junk food. Is things that are high in fat, high in salt, high in sugar. So people often can overeat, and not in a healthy way. So then you've got things like obesity that come into it. And then, of course, unfortunately, sometimes stress can come out behaviorally in an aggressive form. So particularly if people are developing sort of anger issues, that can lead them to directing anger towards people. It could be employees, could be colleagues, could be their bosses, spouses, partners, other family members, friends. And so then obviously that can cause a lot of relationship disharmony. So those are sort of the negative ways which people cope with stress.
Okay. Let's talk about workplace. So how does chronic stress manifest in the workplace, and what can companies do to help their employees deal with it better?
Yeah, so chronic stress, so basically the three main causes of stress at work are workload, not feeling in control, and not feeling as though you have the right support. Those are the three top causes of stress in the workplace. So often it manifests itself in the sense that people feel sometimes like they can't speak up. So they'll kind of just deal with it. So their workload will gradually increase, or they'll have these expectations, or they'll start to think they don't know what they can do. So, for example, or they're able to do what they've been asked to do. So, for example, there are lots of definitions of stress, but this is one definition of stress I love. It's when you feel you don't have the resources to do what you feel as though you need to do. And no more true is that than is that at work. I haven't got enough time. I haven't got the knowledge. I haven't got the support. You start doubting yourself and you feel like I can't do it. I just can't do it. And that is what drives stress. And if that is left unaddressed, if you don't have a voice, if you don't feel as though you can speak out or say something, or you feel as though you're not listened to, you may say something, but no one listens to you. What happens is this less levels of stress often just build up, build up, build up, build up, build up, gradually and gradually. And then what happens? Either people are forced off sick. Again, I think the amount of days lost is something like 17 million days or something like that per year due to stress, depression, anxiety in the workplace. It costs the government 8 billion a year because people get to the point where they break down. They don't want to go to work. They can't cope anymore, so they get signed off sick, or it manifests in some other way, like depression, anxiety, and all these symptoms. People can withdraw, people's character can change, they just will start not turning up to work. They might look like a bit of a shell, bit of a ghost, just sort of frozen there at their computer, not knowing what to do. Or it can manifest itself sometimes in aggression. So people will be short, people will end up sending curt responses, sending angry emails, all those sort of stuff. But so really any change in character it can be sort of picked up on, people are, in terms of colleagues or if you're a boss looking for changes in character. But I mean, unfortunately, one of the ways it mainly presents is people having time off work because they just can't cope. They're either burnt out or they're just overwhelmed and are suffering mentally. So in terms of what you can do about this, first of all, is do the opposite. So if those are the three main causes, workload, not feeling in control, not feeling in support. First of all, make sure that the workload is appropriate for individuals. So it means talking to employers, talking to employees, and vice versa, having a respectful but open space to talk about these things and discuss these things. People's workloads, will work. People work differently and work when they can tolerate different levels, different types of work. So working out what workload is appropriate. And if you think something's too much for you, please say, and employers should be hopefully able to listen to that and to manage workload, because there's no point in burning someone out because, well, then they won't be there for 6 months. We have to pay them sick pay, and that doesn't help anybody. Second of all, is making sure your employees are properly supported. And that means in their work, yeah. So if you've got the right support to do the work they're asking you to do in the first place, if you've got the training, have you got a mentor? Have you got someone you can call, someone you can ask, someone checking in on you in a nice way? And also that, you have supports for, we have these things called employee assistance programs, and every business has to have one. So if you're sitting here thinking, what's that? I don't think my employees ever told me about that. Go and ask, because it's a legal requirement. So they should be able to be looking after your well-being as well. And also, this is a great thing as well. Employers, I would also encourage them to give their employees more control, more say, a little bit more autonomy. It doesn't mean you have, free reign of the place. But actually, when people feel like they don't have any control, they're just being told what to do, they can't think for themselves, they feel like can feel like a piece of machinery, just churning out things, which is stressful. But if you're able to give employees a little bit more say, a little bit more empowerment, a little bit more autonomy, actually, that can make that individual feel more in control, more purposeful, more in control of their destiny. Again, because we feel out of control, we feel stressed. But if you let someone feel a bit more in control, actually that can really reduce stress levels. So that's really important.
And how to prevent chronic stress?
So yeah, sounds obvious, doesn't it? But avoid the source of stress. I mean, that sounds very obvious, but the two ways I would say is, you can tackle stress obviously when it comes, that's fine. But if we're looking at chronic stress, which is often subtle and goes on and on and on, there are a couple of different ways you can prime your body on what we call holistic or a general underlying level that will help you deal with stress a lot better. First of all is looking up your needs. So are all your needs being met? So we have these things, people can look it up. I'm sure they may well have heard of it or Google it. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, there are basic needs like need to eat, need to, have shelter, all that sort of stuff. So hopefully your workplace has all that and you can do that at your workplace. But also it does mean about, being able to have a competency. So believing you're good at something, having people tell you that you're good at something. So having positive feedback, making sure these processes are available, you have support at work. Making sure you have work. Sometimes you can all do, we can isolate, we can withdraw, we're really busy, we have lunch at our desks, all that sort of stuff, or tapping away. No, put your work down, go and socialize. It might seem really counterintuitive, you don't want to do it, but do it. Honestly, your brain in a way might be fighting, no, we can't do this, I've got to sit here, I've got to be stressed, I've got to do all this work. No. Another thing people don't, stress is addictive. People think, well, how could stress be addictive? Caffeine and smoking are both addictive. I think we can agree with that. And they act on this, they activate they increase your cortisol levels and your adrenaline levels. So if you think stress is addictive, it is, because caffeine's addictive, smoking's addictive. Therefore, stress is addictive. So actually trying to step back from that is really important. Self-care, another great one. Self-care is really simple, but none of us do it. So L'Oreal obviously came with that great advert, you're worth it, and tapped into it. But it's true in the sense that you have to believe you're worth self-care. a good night's sleep, trying to get 8 hours a day, eating regular meals. Don't skip breakfast. I know it's stupid and everyone says it, but have a bit of breakfast. Make sure you have break and have a bit of lunch and meet with fellow people, commune with fellow people. That releases oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It relaxes us. It makes us feel fuzzy and warm and lovely. Have a laugh, releases dopamine, endorphins. All these things counter the stress response. And making sure you're getting out and having some exercise. It doesn't matter if it's a walk, doesn't matter if it's a run, whatever it is, do those sorts of things. And of course, then the final thing is what we talked about briefly before, is the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is the complete opposite to the sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic is fight and flight, parasympathetic is rest and restore. And so how do you activate this wonderful magical system that we have inside us? Very simply, actually, there's lots of simple things you can do. The most common one people will find these days, and they've seen it on TV, is breathing techniques. So some called the Iceman, I think Wim Hof, who got celebrities dunking themselves in ice baths and breathing, whatever. So there are certain breathing techniques. The common one is just to breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. Belly breath, so your belly comes out, you breathe in through your nose, and then you breathe out through pursed lips for 6 seconds. And you do that. And I guarantee if you do that as part of your routine for 10 minutes every day, it will gradually activate the parasympathetic system more and more and more, and you will feel less stressed. So there are certain things you can do that. We also know, we haven't touched on it, but also diet. So basically what you eat affects what bacteria grow in your bowel. If you eat lots of rubbish food, bacteria grow that are pro-inflammatory. We know pro-inflammatory is bad. We don't want pro-inflammatory. If you eat a good diet, you actually get healthy bacteria that are anti-inflammatory. So again, it might sound obvious and boring, but it's things like nuts, seeds, fruit, vegetables, whole grains, that sort of stuff, bit of protein. So if you eat well, you will feel well. In terms of lifestyle, the great thing about lifestyle is that it's often, generally speaking, within our control. And there is, one part of various sorts of psychological treatments, particularly one called NLP, is that we have all the resources we need in us and available to us to overcome problems that we face. So actually, we do have the resources we need in order to overcome things like chronic stress. So that's the good news. So what sort of are these resources? What can we do in our lifestyle? Well, first resources, obviously, if there is a source of chronic stress that you are aware of, so it might be your job, or it might be something to do with relationships or whatever, is addressing that source of chronic stress if it's obvious. And often by addressing it, it means just having a conversation just to start the ball rolling. Think about what the problem is, think about what your needs are, and sort of voice them and sort of try to get them met. In terms of general lifestyle points, we've obviously talked there about maladaptive ones that people do, drinking too much, smoking, eating sort of the wrong types of food now, or having excess caffeine, for example. Now, it's easy for me, obviously, saying, well, cut them out or reduce them. That's very easy to do. But what happens is with like anything that you're sort of ingesting in your body, your body does get adapted to it, becomes a bit dependent on it to an extent. So often it's not necessarily about going cold turkey. It's just about reducing things a bit, modifying things a little bit, bit by bit. So if you're smoking 20 a day, try 15 a day. If you're drinking or binge drinking too much, just reduce the amount you're drinking per time. With diet, try and substitute things for other things, less healthy options for more healthy options, and just do it gradually like that, because each time you do that, you are decreasing inflammation in your body, which is healthier, and it is decreasing stress as well. And try and find more positive ways of coping with stress. We know, for example, generally speaking, that women, on the whole, deal with stress better than men. So men go very much into fight and flight mode and almost view stress as a competition sometimes. And that's a generalization. I'm not saying every man, but that's kind of the way men tend to process it a bit more. And and generally speaking, mental health, men tend to be quieter, more silent about it, feel as though they can deal with it by themselves, get on with it by themselves. They don't want to talk to people about it, or they feel as though they can't. Whereas women often are more able to voice their needs and opinions, and they're often more likely to share their problems and how they're feeling. Now, that's good for lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons, just biochemically, is that releases oxytocin, which you mentioned previously before. Oxytocin is a bonding hormone. It's a hormone we get from a sense of community, and it relaxes us. It gives us a sense of purpose, gives us a sense of being wanted, and it relaxes us. That immediately reduces chronic stress. And that's another reason why actually things like loneliness are really bad for us, actually, and can add to stress. Actually, being part of community is really important. Um, and again, we've talked about self-care. Sleep is hugely important. You spend a third of your life sleeping. Get it right, or do the best you can to get it right. There are lots of different stages of sleep. They're all very important. If you don't get through all those stages of sleep regularly, you increase risk of things like dementia. You decrease your ability to form memories. You decrease your ability to make decisions. And that's another thing actually we didn't talk about. Sorry, I didn't mention with chronic stress, but actually, if you're chronically stressed, your hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that's involved in memory formation, shrinks. So your long-term memory is fine, but your working memory is shorter. So you forget things, you don't retain information. And also this part of your brain at the front here, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's designed for what we call higher executive functioning, basically making decisions, informed decisions, gets smaller. So if you're chronically stressed, this part of your brain shrinks, it atrophies due to the neurons dying there due to inflammation. So you're less able to make good decisions. So sleep well. We've talked about the importance of diet in terms of the bacteria that it causes or activates in your body to reduce inflammation, and having proper time to rest. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean sitting on the sofa watching Netflix. That's great, wonderful, but actually, what it means is actually having proper time to sit quietly and reflect and rest just in peace. Now, a lot of people find that very difficult to do. And if you find that very difficult to do, it's probably a hint that you're slightly addicted to stress, or that you've got issues that you're not comfortable with. You're not comfortable with yourself. And actually, sometimes we spend time with ourselves, we actually feel uncomfortable because we don't really like ourselves that much, or we have intrusive thoughts. So if you can't do that, actually, there's a sign that you might be addicted to stress. Stress is addictive, or that there's some work actually that might need to be done, sort of deeper work in all seriousness that might benefit you. And being open and honest. So if you, I know we talk about it more these days, and it is a thing, but it still has some stigma about it. But actually, if you can be part of community, if you can talk to people about certain things, you don't need to tell everybody everything, but if you can tell someone something, you know, that it doesn't matter if it's your therapist, if it's a friend member, it's a family member, if it's, part of a community, your church, your Pilates group, it doesn't matter, whatever it is, football team, cricket team, talking and being part of community is a really important lifestyle change. But also, I would say another fundamental thing is addressing your needs, really looking at what needs you have in life and what needs aren't met. And also another piece of work you can do for lifestyle is looking at your faulty core beliefs. So looking at your core beliefs that you sort of actually are negative. So, oh, well, I'm not very good at this, or I'm not a nice person, or I'm not very good when I do that. And addressing those core beliefs actually can really sort of influence. So be reflective, take great self-care, be part of community, and make sure you're getting your needs met, really.
So there's a couple of things you mentioned. Well, what would you recommend as a first step in changing your lifestyle?
Reflection and evaluation. So we talked about very practical things like, obviously reducing alcohol, or reducing fast food, or reducing smoking, etc. Those are very practical things you can do. And those may be first great measures, by the way. Or, for example, another one actually is if you don't have any community activity, if you don't have any sense of belonging, go find some, take up a hobby, join a club, do whatever it might be. Don't isolate, don't withdraw, go and sit with people at lunchtime, don't sort of sit by yourself. But actually, probably the main thing I would talk about is actually taking yourself some time every day, if you can. And it might just have to be long. It could be 15 minutes. It could be half an hour. And sitting down and really thinking about where you are in your life, how you're feeling, getting in touch with your emotions, and reflecting on them. And I know for me, that's been a massive thing that really changed my life, because my life was always on sort of, it was always on the go. I was always doing things. And actually one of the reasons why I was doing them and it was making me stressed was A, because I was probably a bit addicted to stress. But also I found myself, what I was doing was running away actually from a lot of problems that I had, and I didn't want to address them. So I distract myself with work and stress and doing this and doing that and taking on too much. So actually, I would say being brave, even just sitting by yourself 50 minutes in the quiet, just see what comes into your mind, see what you pops up, what thoughts pop up, note them down. Have some quality time to yourself to think and process. And it doesn't happen overnight, but if you do that often enough, what you'll find is that you start to form a picture of what you are actually feeling, what is actually going on in your life. Actually, if there are areas that you're actually upset about, or not dealing very well with, or that are stressed about, and then you can make a plan and you can do something about it. But I think for the first step, I would say, beyond sort of obvious stuff like alcohol, etc., take 15 minutes to yourself every day. Find somewhere quiet where you won't be disturbed, somewhere peaceful, and just sit and see what comes to mind.
Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience?
I mean, I think we've covered obviously some of the main points there about stress and whatnot. I guess from my background, I'm also sort of quite scientific, so I'm always interested to sort of push the science of things a little bit, because I think it can make things more tangible. And I know we touched on about the parasympathetic nervous system, and I just wanted to add to that. Just as proof that these things work. So I'm not talking rubbish, okay? So let's say the opposite to the sympathetic nervous system, which causes release of adrenaline, a stress hormone, is the parasympathetic nervous system. And it runs again from your brain down throughout your body. And it releases hormones or neurotransmitters. One of the main ones is called GABA, okay? Now, GABA causes the exact opposite effects of adrenaline. So heart rate slows, breathing rate slows, blood goes back to your gut, you digest, inflammation levels, as we say, very key, drop. And it's so effective. There are whole brands of medication made to activate this artificially or made to mimic it. So people might be aware of drugs like gabapentin or pregabalin, which are often used for pain, can be used for mood disorders, even epilepsy, which is overactivity in the brain. So medicine is onto it. And also, as I said before, alcohol. When we have that first, people know when we get home from work and we've been stressed or looking after the kids, we have a glass of wine or gin and tonic, whatever it is, and we get that initial release of, that's because alcohol is activating the same receptors in the parasympathetic nervous system. Diazepam, if anyone's ever had taken diazepam for anxiety for a flight or a dentist appointment or whatever, and it relaxes them, diazepam acts on the same receptors. But the great thing is we have this system in place already. We don't need alcohol in theory or diazepam. Actually, what we need is just know how to activate it ourselves. And that's where we briefly mentioned breathing techniques. Please have a look at more of those. That's a great way of doing it. There are even other ways, basically exposing yourself to the cold. So cold showers are very good. Drinking. One great tip is actually, we should all stay more hydrated throughout the day, right? Generally speaking, drink cold water. Put water in the fridge, put a jug of cold water in the fridge, get it cold. If you've got ice at work, get some ice in your water. Make sure it's cold. Not only are you hydrating yourself, you'll be activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which will, you might not necessarily overtly feel more relaxed, but again, subconsciously, it's reducing those stress levels. Everything we can do to get that stress level a bit, so those cortisol levels a little bit lower, that's the most important thing. And the one last thing I want to share as well is just a barometer for when people, if they know whether they're stressed or not, because I say it's not always that easy to identify. There's this great curve. It's a bell-shaped curve, so it goes like that, and it's to do with stress and performance. So on the bottom line is stress, so from no stress to lots of stress, and on the other line is performance. So our performance is rubbish, our performance is great. And what happens is we all need a bit of stress in our lives. Okay, stress gets us up in the morning. So we have a natural rise of cortisol levels in the morning because it wakes us up because we have to get up. We have to get up, and even if it's just to go and do the food shopping, have a drink, have some water, make sure our property is safe on a very basic level. That's why we have a cortisol level rise in the morning, and it gets us up out of bed. Now, as the level of stress increases a bit, our performance actually increases. We hit this sweet spot at the top of the curve, which is called our eustress moment, or what people call flow activities. So that's when you're just focused, doing what you're doing, quite enjoying it. Time is going by. You're not distracted. You're in the moment. You don't feel particularly stressed. And that's when your performance level is at the highest. And that's where we want to be, generally speaking. But what happens is as stress gets more and more and more, so the stress level increases, eventually our performance level starts to drop. Okay. We start to have those sort of slight sick feeling in our stomach. We start to feel our shoulders tensing. We start grinding our teeth, and we get this sort of temporal tension headaches here. We might feel a bit shaky, and our performance level drops off, and we start to get more tired, more irritable, less able to make decisions, and less able to cope. Now, if you're getting towards this side of the curve, you're on this side of the curve, that is a sign, and you're on that side of the curve, increasingly more and more as time is going by. Take that as a warning sign that whatever is happening in your life, whether it's to do with work or whatever is going on outside of work, whatever it might be, something needs dressing, because otherwise it's only going to get worse. And actually, there is no point, absolutely no point in burning yourself out and being of no use to yourself or anybody else or whatever it might be. There's no point in getting to that level. Sometimes stress in our society is, you have to work hard, you have to be stressed, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do a million things at once. No, it will kill you. Your performance will drop off. There's no point. It'll make you miserable. You're far better to bring yourself, address your needs, whatever it is, reducing workload, having more control, having more support, whatever it might be, shift yourself back to that top part of the curve or just before that, and find that spot where you are in your flow, when you're most productive. That's the best thing for you. It's the best thing for your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health. It's the best thing, therefore, for the people around you, because they will know that, they will sense that. You will have more capacity to do other things that you enjoy. So it's that eustress curve. And just remember, eustress is good. Some stress is good. We all need stress throughout the day. That's absolutely fine. Eustress is brilliant. Anything beyond that, really complete waste of time. And it's only going to make your life a lot worse, and potentially other people's as well.
Brilliant. So a big thank you to you for sharing your knowledge with us. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Oh, my pleasure. I loved it too. Thank you very much.